evening, good evening, good evening. No, you're all right. I can't hear myself. Oh, there we are. All right, I got to get closer. Terry's hard at work. He's going to start sweating drops of blood here pretty quick, I'm sure. All right, 541. 541. There's a very small section over here that needs to sing loud. They're not going to pay attention to me, but all right. All the little bit bigger than children's size, my children's size. All right, teens, you're going to have to sing real loud, all right? We got to get ready for camp. It's a good song for that, right? 541. All right, we'll get started here. I'm just giving them a hard time. The joy of the Lord is my strength. 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 He heals the brokenhearted and they cry no more. He heals the brokenhearted and they cry no more. He heals the brokenhearted and they cry no more. The joy of the Lord is my strength. He gives me living water and I thirst no more. He gives me living water and I thirst no more. He gives me living water and I thirst no more. The joy of the Lord is my strength. All right, teens, you ready for the ha-ha? Huh? Ha-ha? Come on. Ha 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 ha. The joy of the Lord is my strength. Yeah, see? They'll get it by camp time. I'm sure. All right, page 503. Or no, sorry, 502. 502. We're going to practice a little transition. So when we sing all three verses of In My Heart There Rings a Melody, we will transition into the next page over, which is Since Jesus Came Into My Heart. Should I tell him my ting? Yeah, I better tell him the ting. All right, so we've tried to do a little practicing, and so that way at least I'm doing it right. And so she puts a little ting in there, and it's a high-pitched, yep, right there. And so when that happens, then we will start. What a wonderful change. So we'll up and down. All right, very good. All right, we'll get started right here on 502. I have a song that Jesus gave me. It was sent from heaven above. There never was a sweeter melody. 'Tis the melody of love. In my heart there rings a melody. There rings a melody with heaven's harmony. In my heart there rings a melody. There rings a melody of love. I love the Christ who died on Calvary, for he washed my sins away. He put within my heart a melody, and I know it's there to stay. In my heart there rings a melody, heaven's harmony, heaven's harmony. In my heart there rings a melody, there rings a melody of love. 'Twill be my endless theme and glory, with the angels I will sing. 'Twill be the song with glorious harmony, courts of heaven ring. In my heart there rings a melody, there rings a melody with heaven's harmony. In my heart there rings a melody, there rings a melody of love. Now transition. What wonderful change in my life has been wrought since Jesus came into my heart. I have light in my soul for which long I had sought since Jesus came into my heart. Since Jesus came into my heart, since Jesus came into my heart, floods of joy o'er my soul like the sea billows roll. Since Jesus came into my heart, I have ceased from my wandering and going astray. Since Jesus came into my heart, and my sins, which are many, are all washed away. Since Jesus came into my heart, since Jesus came into my heart, since Jesus came into my heart, floods of joy o'er my soul like the sea billows roll. Since Jesus came into my heart, I will go to the dwelling in that sea. Since Jesus came into my heart, and unhappy, so happy as onward I go. Since Jesus came into my heart, since Jesus came into my heart, since Jesus came into my heart, floods of joy o'er my soul like the sea billows roll. Since Jesus came into my heart. All right, and let's see, one last song here on page 496. 496. No one ever cared for me like Jesus. Kind of goes along with the message this morning, huh? I would love to tell you what I think of Jesus, since I found in him a friend so strong and true. I would tell you how he changed my life completely. He did something that no other friend could do. No one ever cared for me like Jesus. There's no other friend so kind as he. No one else could take the sin and darkness from me. Oh, oh, how much he cared for me. All my life was full of sin when Jesus found me. All my heart was full of misery and woe. Jesus placed his strong and loving arms around me, and he led me in the way I ought to go. One ever cared for me like Jesus. There's no other friend so kind as he. No one else could take the sin and darkness from me. Oh, how much he cared for me. Every day he comes to assurance. More and more I understand his words of love. But I'll never know just why he came to save me, till someday I see his blessed face above. No one ever cared for me like Jesus. There's no other a friend so kind as he. No one else could take the sin and darkness from me. Oh, how much he cared for me. All right, Brother Barry.
Thank you, sir. Good evening, and good evening to you. Thank you, lady. Appreciate your playing. It's good. Thank the Lord. Just some announcements. Okay. We will have an ordination service on the 13th. Should be a business meeting in there on the 11th, I believe, right? Business meeting the 11th and special prayer meeting for the election coming up on Monday night, November 2nd. I know a lot of people have already voted, but I've noticed, a lot of prayer going up around the country, seeing things about it on the news. Folks are really seeking the Lord and asking God to help. And as I said this morning, I pray about it every day. Every day, ask God to guide and direct in our country. And maybe some folks don't understand. Well, why do you old people feel that way? Because we can see a lot of change when you're looking back over 60 or 70 years as opposed to 20 or even 30 years. You can see a lot of difference that has taken place in our country. Freedom is something that is wonderful. I think it was Ronald Reagan who said we're never more than one generation away from losing our freedom. It's up to every generation to carry on the things that our country has stood for. See, I'm an old guy, and it's not going to be that many years before I go on to be with the Lord, but some of our young people over here, if things continue on, they won't be free someday. And once you lose your freedom, you just can't hardly get it back. Be a lot of bloodshed, a lot of heartache to ever get that freedom back. So what you want to do is not lose it to begin with. Because if you lose your freedom and your vote doesn't count, and folks, that's what some folks in this country want. They want our country to be like the socialist / communist countries of the world. They may say we don't like hardcore communism like is in China. Chinese people, do you know Chinese people are graded by their government? You get a citizenship score from the government. Every person does. If they write something that is, in opposition against the government, or if they say something to somebody and it's reported, the government keeps a score. And if you score low, meaning you have said some things that they don't like, or you support something they don't like, or you read something they don't like, then you're denied privileges. You can't be trusted as a good Chinese communist citizen. We don't want that in our country. We want to be free, don't we? We want to have liberty and the freedom to worship God, and the freedom to get in our car and go somewhere if we want to without having to ask permission from the government. I don't want to have to ask permission to be able to take a road trip or go on vacation with my wife. So liberty's precious. Many generations before us, people have fought and died for our liberty. For 8 years during the American Revolution, many people laid down their lives so that we could have a free country. And it was bought with their blood. And since that time, there's been, sacrifices that have been made by our military for not only the United States, but other nations around the world in order to purchase freedom. Freedom, the cost of freedom is high. And it costs some people their lives for us to have freedom. And so I hope that you'll cherish your freedom. I cherish my freedom. And appreciate the country that we have that's given you our freedom. I really didn't realize how great America was until I went to some other nations. I've spent a little bit of time in Russia. The first time I went there, it was the Soviet Union. And it was really a different place. The quality of life there was much lower. The standard of living was much lower. People weren't used to being able to worship the Lord. I preached in some churches in Kiev that had, until just recently, had been underground churches where they were off the radar, Sometimes they met in private homes. They had to be afraid for meeting because they could go to prison for meeting. Churches had to be registered, and they had to be monitored, and the songs had to be approved, and the activities had to be approved, and it was illegal to try to go out and get somebody else saved. It was just you, and you were there in the church, but it was against the law to evangelize. Now, folks, I've seen this. I've seen it with my own eyes in those places. And when I think about what they want to do to our country, it just makes me bound and determined to do what I can to keep it from happening. And so I can vote, I can pray, I can talk to others, as I said this morning, and so can we all. If you love your freedom, if you love the life that you have, if we don't stand up for it, it's going to change. It's going to change drastically. So there's a lot at stake. If you can vote, I hope you'll go and vote, and I hope you'll vote for freedom. One side in our country wants liberty and wants the American way of life. The other side in our country burns down cities and demand that we give in to them, or they're going to make us pay. Well, I tell you, if you give in to them, you're going to keep paying and keep paying and keep paying. Well, that's enough for political speech tonight. I didn't want anybody to, misunderstand where I was coming from. If you had any doubts, I'm for liberty. I'm for religious liberty. I'm for having the freedom to worship the Lord according to my conscience. There's a lot of people out there in the world that I don't agree with spiritually, doctrinally. But you know what? They have a right to believe what they want to believe. That's their right as an American. And I stand up for that. Even if it disagrees with me, I still stand up for that. Because you see, I want the right to have my Bible and worship God according to my own conscience. And I know you do as well. Well, that was announcements, I guess. And I was going to, all of that leads up to, we're going to have a meeting on November the 2nd, a prayer meeting here at the church, and I hope you'll come, and I hope you'll gather here together, and we'll get on our knees before the Lord, and we'll ask God to help us, and we'll seek the Lord, and because we need His help in this. We need His help. I'd rather pray than have a a big war in our streets, hadn't you? I'd rather seek the Lord and vote than to see a lot of bad things happen. And you say, well, Ulysses, it's not going to happen here. It might not happen here, but if it happens somewhere else, it's going to affect what happens here. So all of that's important. Okay, announcements, that's pretty much them. We added Martha Landis to the prayer list this morning. We starred Al Baker, and we're really praying for Brother. In Old Testament history, when a big event is going to take place. Now, for 80 years, 40 years before that, for 120 years, the nation of Israel has been pretty steady under even before that, back through the time of the judges, they've had a number of years where things have been pretty stable. And certainly in the days of David, David was a good warrior. He conquered a lot of countries. He put a lot of countries to tribute. And during the time of David, Israel began to grow richer and more powerful, and he was certainly a good leader. And after David, his son Solomon began to reign, and we've talked about Solomon. Solomon had a long life, and he had, an opportunity to be blessed of the Lord. God gave him rest. He didn't have to fight many wars. He had a lot of tribute money coming into the coffers of Israel, and he was pretty much a spender. He built a lot of things. He decorated a lot of things. He had high tax rates on not only the nations around him, but the people of Israel. And so he lived in opulence. Everything he had was the best and the most beautiful and the most expensive. He lived a life in excess. I mean, in his court, he had 700 women who were not legal wives, but they were his. They were his concubines. And he had 300 wives. There's no telling how many children he had. There is no telling. But he went to excess in everything. He didn't believe in moderation in many things. And yet he was the wisest man who ever lived. Human wisdom, even at its best, is not good enough. We need the wisdom of the Lord and the leadership of the Lord and the direction of the Lord. So we're going to read about his son. We know that Solomon died, and he'd done a lot of wonderful things. He built a magnificent temple in which to worship the Lord. You know, as a beginning Bible student, I really struggled with why God would allow the temple to be ransacked. Why he would allow all of the gold and silver. I mean, the walls inside the holy place and Holy of Holies was overlaid with gold, just sheets of gold. Very beautiful. Very magnificent. Why would God allow that to be taken away? Those mighty cedar beams that came from Lebanon, those huge cedar trees in Lebanon, they cut them down and square huge beams from those trees, and so large that they would, that they would float them in the sea to Jaffa and then carry them overland to Jerusalem to build the temple with. These were the rafters that held up the roof and other things in the temple. Some of them were probably used as columns and overlaid with gold. And so it was a very beautiful building. Why would God allow it to be destroyed? I had trouble understanding that as a young Christian. Why would God allow his house to be burned to a pile of ashes like it was? Why would he allow the stones of the temple, and in 70 A.D., the stones of the temple were torn down? Jesus said not one stone would be left upon another. And in 70 A.D. that happened. In fact, Josephus tells us that the temple site was like a plowed ground, that all of the stones were taken away and the temple was completely destroyed. Why would God allow that? And the answer to that is this: God is more worried about hearts than He is about things. Things don't mean much to God. God spoke and all these things came into existence. So why would God be so preoccupied with things? That's not His first love. But what God is interested in is the hearts of people. God is interested in how much we love Him. God is interested in our obedience to Him. God is interested in whether or not we place Him first in our lives. And you know, I thank the Lord as He looks down at our country. I think He's interested in how much our country, is willing to obey Him. I think it's amazing that a great nation like America would be guilty of killing 60 million unborn children. You know, those aborted children. And I tell you, when they're aborted later in the abortion, they're actually just cut up inside the womb and brought out in pieces. The little babies. You know, I think God is interested in that. That is a sin and an unrighteousness that stains our land. All of us would be appalled if someone went into a large daycare center and began to just slaughter children. We'd think that was awful. At least those little children can run. A child in the womb can't escape the doctor's knife. The suction that pulls the body parts out. I know that's bad to talk about that, but listen, abortion is bad. Abortion is wicked. It's ungodly. It's a blight on our land. And a holy and righteous God will hold this nation accountable for it. God's interested in things like that. He's interested in our obedience to Him. I said this about David. The reason all of the kings of Israel were compared to David was because of his heart for God, his love for God, his obedience to God, and the fact that he repented when God showed him that he had done wrong. It wasn't that he was perfect, but it was that he loved God. And when he realized he did something wrong and the Lord confronted him with it, he immediately repented. He didn't go on in hardness of heart, but he repented and would return to the Lord. He did that even after he was guilty of grievous sin, murder and adultery. And so he became the standard. So tonight we're coming into a change in Israel's history. You know, for 120 years it was a united kingdom under the kings of, that God had given the land of Israel. He had some wonderful, wonderful kings and times of peace. And right now in Israel, and I was in Israel last year, and you know what they're looking for? They're looking for another time like that in their history. Another time of peace, a time of prosperity, a time like it was during the days of David and Solomon. They still want that in Israel today, and they believe that that's what Messiah is going to bring to their land. And they want it. So David and Solomon are still relevant, especially David. You know, the flag of Israel is the six-pointed star of David. That's his star. That's his symbol, and it marks that nation. So Solomon died, as all people do. It doesn't matter how popular you are. It doesn't matter how handsome or beautiful you are. It doesn't matter what your intelligence is. It doesn't matter how much wisdom you have. It doesn't matter if everything around you is lined with gold. It doesn't matter how much you run. You know, I was out working in the yard the other day, and I looked up, and here came this young fella, and he was at a dead run, exercising, going right down the street. And I thought to myself, I used to do that. And then I thought, no, you didn't. And he's going to be healthy for a while. But one of these days, even that young fellow's going to get sick, and he's going to die. You see, we all have to die. And it's not the number of years that you live. It's not even the quality of life that you have while you're living. But what's most important is, how are you with the Lord? Because that's what affects eternity. So let's read about Rehoboam. He was the son of Solomon, one of many sons. We don't know how many he had. He had a bunch of them. I mean, folks, he could have had hundreds of sons. The Bible says in 1 Kings 12:1, 1 Kings 12:1 and following, we read about Rehoboam here. And Rehoboam went to Shechem, for all Israel were come to Shechem to make him king. And it came to pass, when Jeroboam the son of Nebat, who was yet in Egypt, heard of it, for he fled from the presence of King Solomon, and Jeroboam dwelt in Egypt. And they sent and called him. And Jeroboam and all the congregation of Israel came and spake unto Rehoboam, saying, Thy father made our yoke grievous. Now therefore make thou the grievous service of thy father and his heavy yoke, which he put upon us, lighter, and we will serve thee. Now he was talking about taxes. He was saying, you know, the people of Israel came with Jeroboam. Jeroboam was a competitor for the throne. And God had told Jeroboam that he was going to give him the 10 northern tribes of Israel. God was going to divide the kingdom. And under Rehoboam, the kingdom divides. And so their request was, you know, lighten up on the taxes, and we'll be happy to be a part of your country, and we'll follow you as our king if you'll just make our burden a little bit easier. I think about this in the political intrigue. Here is Jeroboam, and he's been hiding down in Egypt because he's afraid of Solomon. He's afraid that Solomon's going to kill him. And so when he hears that Solomon's dead and the 10 northern tribes send for him, because they wanted to have a champion to, plead their cause. And at this point in time, they weren't really as wicked as they would become later. Boy, later on, the 10 northern tribes of Israel would become very wicked. So I'm going to refer to Israel, and after Rehoboam, Israel was a different nation than it was before Rehoboam. When David and Solomon were king, when Saul was king, when the judges ruled, then Israel meant all 12 tribes. But now with the divided kingdom, Israel would be the 10 northern tribes. And the tribe of Benjamin And Benjamin was a decimated little tribe. There weren't many of them because of things that happened in the past, because of sin and because the tribe of Benjamin backed sin. The nation of Israel rose up against them, and their numbers were severely cut back, and they just didn't recover from that, maybe like we would have hoped. So you had the small tribe of Israel, you had the tribe of Judah in the south. And also you had the Levites who were serving in the temple, who lived in Jerusalem. And so you had Benjamin and you had Judah and you had some of the Levites that were there. Now the Levites were in different cities around the country, so it was just a portion of them that were left in the south. And when I say Judah, I'm talking about the tribe of Judah, the tribe of Benjamin, and those Levites that were in the little bitty southern nation, because the nation split. The 10 tribes were to the north, and they had most of the land. They had most of the wealth. They had most of the people. And so 2 nations now exist. And they're brothers because they're all descendants of Jacob, who was named Israel. But they're going to fight one another. Judah's going to go to war against Israel. There's going to be times that Israel's going to defeat Judah and treat them like they're just a foreign country, that's all. And there'll be times that Judah will do the same. So one nation became 2, and both were headed for destruction. So verse 5 says, here's Rehoboam. They've asked him to make the taxes lighter. Verse 5, and he said unto them, depart yet for 3 days, and then come again to me. And the people departed. And King Rehoboam consulted with the old men which stood before Solomon his father while he yet lived, and said, how do you advise that I may answer this people? And they spake unto him, saying, if thou wilt be a servant unto this people this day, and will serve them, and answer them, and speak good words to them, then they will be thy servants forever. Verse 8 says, but he forsook the counsel of the old men, which they had given him, and he consulted with the young men that were grown up with him, which stood before him. And he said unto them, what counsel give ye that we may answer this people, who have spoken unto me, saying, make the yoke which thy father did put upon us lighter? And the young men that were grown up with him spake unto him, saying, thus shalt thou speak unto this people that spake unto thee, saying, thy father made our yoke heavy, but make thou it lighter unto us. Thus shalt thou say unto them, my little finger shall be thicker than my father's loins. Okay? Now here's what he's saying. The taxes of Solomon are like this. Okay? But my taxes are going to be like this. Big fat waist like I got, He said, you think you had it bad. You hadn't even begun to see the kind of taxes you're going to see. He was a young fella, and he was wanting to establish his identity, who he was with everybody. He wanted everybody to know that he was king and he was boss, and it was going to be his way. Okay. Verse 11, now whereas my father did lade you with a heavy yoke, I will add to your yoke. My father hath chastised you with whips, but I will chastise you with scorpions. So Jeroboam and all the people came to Rehoboam the 3rd day, and the king, as the king had appointed, saying, come unto me the 3rd day. And the king answered the people roughly, and forsook the old men's counsel that they gave him. and spake unto them after the counsel of the young men, My father made your yoke heavy, and I will add to your yoke. My father also chastised you with whips. That means a chastisement is a punishment. He said, But I'll chastise you with scorpions. Wherefore the king hearkened not unto the people, for the cause was from the Lord, that he might perform this saying which the Lord spake by Ahijah the Shilonite unto Jeroboam the son of Nebat. Now let's get some things out of this, okay? Here's one. Choose your counselors carefully. There's all kinds of people out there in the world willing to give you advice. Choose carefully who you're going to listen to. You know, I love my young people over there, and I'm not going to pick on them tonight. I would not do that because I do love them very much. But I will say this, that young people, if you go to your peers out here in the world and you ask them about the important things of your life, if you ask them about salvation or, what you ought to do with the Lord, that's not going to be very important to them. If you go to them and you ask them, do you think it's okay if I live with this young woman or this young man? And they're going to say, no, it doesn't matter. It really doesn't matter. If you love them, it's okay. And it doesn't matter if you're female and that person's female, or you're male and that other person's male. The world doesn't care about that. But God does. And if a young lady gets with child and goes to the world and says, listen, I have this pregnancy that I really can't go through with this. What do you think? Is it okay if I end this pregnancy? And they'll say, sure. Yeah. And somebody out there will even help pay for it. Anything important that comes up, if you ask the world, they're going to tell you the wrong way to do things. They're going to tell you the way that is opposed to what God has said in His Word. Rehoboam went to the counselors that stood before Solomon. Now I know that you can be an old codger. I probably am one, especially at times, I got this gray hair, and a lot of the things that the youth do today, I don't do, and I may not understand what's going on in every way in their world. But I will tell you this, there's something to be said about having a lifetime of experience to call upon. If you go to the Lord and you ask His counsel, or you go to a godly father or a godly grandfather or a godly brother or a sister, if you're an adult, and you want counsel from them and they give you the counsel of the Lord, if your mind is turned another way, you may not take that too well. I imagine what Rehoboam was thinking. He consulted with the old man, and they said to him, you know what, you ought to do what they say and you can be king. You don't have to show them that you're a big man. You don't have to compete with your father. And a lot of times kids do that, don't they? Sons will compete with their father. Sometimes daughters will compete with their mothers. And young people are trying to do some things anyway. They're figuring out who they are, and they're trying to establish their independence. And that's a natural part of life. We all did that, didn't we? I was talking to somebody the other day who was, I think it was Dan, or maybe I heard him say this in a sermon while I was home with the COVID, He said, I'll never forget the time, do you remember when he said this? when Mama spanked us and we laughed about it, he and Sam. And then she said, okay, I'm not doing this anymore. I'm telling your father. He said, oh, that was a big mistake. That was a big mistake. But what were they doing when they were laughing at Mama's spanking? They were saying, I'm growing up. I'm an individual. I'm a young adult. I'm laying out my independence here. I'm establishing who I am. And, you know, your spankings just don't bother me anymore. We all have to win our independence, and so do our young people. And I know that, and I understand that. But I would say to young men and women, be careful who you choose for counselors. Be careful who you choose. And young adults, young married people, middle-aged people, seasoned citizens, choose your counselors carefully, because your counselors can have a big effect on your life. Don't discount the elderly. You know, probably only in Christian circles now do the elderly really get very much respect at all, and it's not near what it used to be. I know when I was growing up, I tell you, the very last thing you would do would be to do something to insult an elderly person. You just didn't do that, did you, folks? I mean, you older folks, did you do that? Well, if your mama or daddy heard you insult your grandparents or disrespect them in some way, listen, there were consequences, weren't there? You knew not to do that. I knew not to do that. I was kind of a slow learner at times, but I knew not to do that. But it's not that way anymore. You know, the Bible teaches us to respect older people, to treat them with respect and to honor them. But I think we have some great kids here, but there's a lot of kids in this world today that have no use for old people. These people that are burning down cities, I've seen this on the TV set. They don't mind beating up an elderly woman. Doesn't bother them a bit. They beat up an elderly woman, leave her in the street, or an elderly man. And there's no respect. There's no regard. You're just somebody that's in the way and so far behind you don't know beans about anything. But I want to tell you, there's great value in a lifetime of experience. I guess I was a little different as a child, as a young person growing up. I enjoyed sitting down and talking to older people. I liked to hear what they had to say. I used to love to talk to my grandmother. I would never have known anything about my great-grandfather if my grandmother hadn't told me about it. I mean, she was born in the late 1800s, and she had lived through World War I and the Great Depression and World War II, and she had all of these things that she had lived through, and I'd talk to her about it, and I wanted to hear and learn something from her. She had wisdom. I think that one of the great benefits I had as a kid growing up was living for a time with her, some years with her, because she was from the 1800s. You know, I learned some things from her and got some values from her that have served me well in life. The world now says, throw off those old things. The world says, let go of the old traditions, that stuff is in the past. It doesn't matter anymore. Just go out and do what you feel is good as long as you don't hurt anybody else. And that's our nation today. But what the world doesn't understand is God will hold this nation accountable for its sin, for abortion. It's one of the biggest, foulest sins and crimes of our day, and God will not hold America guiltless for it. I'd like to see it go away. So don't discount the elderly. You know, not everybody who's, you know, the old saying is there's no fool like an old fool. You know, there's a few old fools in the world, but there's a lot of older people in the world that have some understanding and some wisdom and some knowledge and can help us with some things if we'll take time and listen and learn. Okay, I didn't get too far into Rehoboam, but I did get into this part of it a little bit. We'll look at him a little bit more next time, and then we'll move on in our study of the Kings. But if we take anything from this today, we ought to remember it's important who you get your counsel from. It's important who you listen to. I remember seeing one thing one time that said, you know, when I was 15, my dad was the dumbest guy in the world. You know, when I got to be 20, I thought he was finally learning a few things in life. And when I got to be 30, you know, I began to realize my dad was pretty smart. And then I got to be 50, and Dad was gone, and I find myself wishing that I could talk things over with him again. Avail yourself of mom and dad and grandparents and older folks that are around you. They got some things to say that are worthwhile. Well, let's